So let's talk about now going abroad. You've got your local market and now you're moving abroad. And well, Royal Selangor is in the US, UK, Middle East, China. China is a market that you're very keen on. And also you have 2 stores in Jakarta. And British India in Singapore, Thailand, and the Philippines. So what are some problems you face trying to expand abroad? Presumably getting prime space would be one.
I'll start. I think for us, the first challenge is that the markets are different. If you go to our Royal Selangor retail store in China, we sell a lot of our tea-related items, teapots, tea caddies, because the luxury consumer there is willing to spend a lot on tea. So if they're willing to spend a lot on tea, they're willing to spend on nice tea accessories. And then if you go to our Australian business, then they sell wine accessories because they drink a lot of wine. You're willing to spend on wine, you're willing to spend nice wine accessories. So the challenge is to try to figure out what is the product category that's going to drive your business in each of these markets. And there's going to be a consistent offering in terms of that core, but there will be a certain emphasis on different product categories depending on the market we go on. So the challenge for us is to figure out, one, what is the product category that's required for that market that will really drive the business, and two, then to decide whether that market is a priority, because certain markets will be a challenge and a taxing stress on our product development team because it requires constant new product development specifically for those markets. So we have to make conscious decisions on whether we have that capacity to handle these additional loads on product development. So I think the first major challenge is figuring out what fits the lifestyle of the consumer in that market for our business. Beyond that, then there's a lot of execution challenges.
Yourself, Rhoda?
I think for us, it's more about finding the right people to work with in different countries. At the end, the thing is we're not short of offers. We do get a lot of requests from pretty exotic locations to Scandinavian countries to Fiji. But then it is very flattering, but it's important, despite the factory, we still have to be very focused in what we want, the prioritization. And we evaluate every request carefully, and we want to see whether people have the same shared vision, the commitment, as well as the resources to basically execute the way that we envisage the brand to be. So the challenge is about finding the right people to work with.
Well, finding the right partner, this is a challenge any international brand will have. The Western brands, when they come to this part of the world, they also have to find the right partner to work with. I see that Western brands are able to do it quite well in Malaysia and Singapore and this part of the world, but why is it more challenging for a local Malaysian company to do the same when they go overseas? Is it because you don't get the top tier kind of partners and that makes you wary about expanding abroad?
I think maybe perhaps, I'm just speaking from British India's point of view, it's about like having that set criteria and developing that set criteria. When I came on board and I was like looking at some of the criteria that were there, and some of it, I think we have to say some are must have, some are nice to have, that ability to prioritize. Otherwise, in some ways, it's almost like dating, right? You cannot have that whole list of 10. You have to say, okay, this one I can live with, this one maybe not. So you really have to be able to think like that, and then convince the brand owners perhaps, let's just go with, you can live with this.
Chen Tien Yue, you talked about, one way to sell your brand to potential employees is to say, look, if you work with us, there's the prospect of going abroad to be a manager of a store there or to just manage the business there. So, but what we find is that Malaysian brands, retail brands, consumer brands, when they try to go abroad, they can't seem to find the right talent to go abroad, maybe because we're in a comfort zone or we're just not trained, we're not wired to manage other cultures. Strangely, although we live in a multi-racial culture.
You're right. It's not an easy thing to find people who, and I don't think the solution necessarily is that the people we send abroad will lead that market. I think they can bring something to the table, but at the moment, in all our overseas countries, they're run by local country managers. So we have an Australian in charge of Australian business, same for the UK, with the exception of North America, where someone who used to work with us in KL moved to Canada to run the business there. So I don't think it's an easy thing to say that we can send someone, live in the UK, run the business there, recruit a team there, build a team. I think very often it helps to have someone who understands the local culture, the local consumer, and is able to build up his own team. But I think by having some members from head office, from home market, join that team, I think it adds something to the whole thing. But just want to add something on the challenge in finding distributors in other markets. You know, it's back to the strength of the brand. You know, if there are brands which are so strong globally, they just haven't come to Malaysia until 5 years ago, then of course you'll get a whole ton of distributors lining up to sign up that brand. Now, in our case, I'm the first to recognize that in many markets, Royal Selangor is not a recognized brand. And the distributor that we are looking for is someone who will help us build that brand in that market. You know, because we're not looking for the guy who's going to come milk it for 3 years or 5 years and then move on to the next brand. We're looking for somebody who's going to invest long-term in building up that brand. And some markets, that's a long slog. You know, we went into India last year. We opened 2 stores in India with our distributor there. And I tell you, India, nobody knows what Royal Selangor is. Nobody knows what pewter is.
Market's a very gold market.
Silver, gold, pewter is not something they're familiar with. When we had tourists come to our visitor center here, you know, which is a big source of our market intel on people around the world, what would they like? Then they come to our visitor center in KL. You know, we had a tour that went through, and at the end of it, they said, so where do you make your computers? So they had no idea what pewter is. They were just completely confused by the whole thing.
Where are your computers?
And so I don't think it is easy to go into a market and try to build a brand if they don't understand what the material is. So if you're looking for distributors who like the story, who understand the potential, then we work with them in the long term to build up the brand. And that is a lot more difficult than finding someone who's going to milk the strength of a global brand in Malaysia, because you know half the Malaysians already know it.
One of the things is that Malaysia is not a cultural or economic powerhouse. As a result of that, do you find that it doesn't give you the extra lever to sell your brand? It's unlike like Japan, where people generally like Japan, right? Anything that's Japanese. So when even a fairly unknown Japanese brand were to approach a foreign property owner, mall owner, and chances are he might get a second or third conversation. Do you find that's a problem for you as well?
If you think about what makes a good brand, it is not where the brand is from. There are certain elements that are universal as to what makes a good brand. First and foremost, the product has to be of a good quality. Secondly, it has to be unique. Thirdly, does it have mystique? Like, where is the inspiration coming from, right? So if brands have those 3 elements and they are able to tell a compelling story, then the country of origin no longer matters. Unless they have that, say, oh, I know this is Malaysian brand, automatically they kind of put it a tier lower. But it is rare.
Does that happen? Or
no,
it
actually,
doesn't
we
happen?
actually have the opposite issue. Most of the time, people come in and they think that we are from elsewhere. There was once I met hotelier in Singapore of a big hotel, and he was like, he saw me attending the meeting, and he was like, you guys are not Spanish? And I'm like,
It's British India.
because he saw the trellis of our Marina Bay Sands stores, and he said, this looks like something from Spain. And I say, actually, okay, but it's...
Then again, Bill Clinton wears British India, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's all, so from their point of view, country of origin doesn't matter. That even you have a name like British India, you could potentially be from any one of the other countries, because you're drawing from the inspiration of that history.
But I think you're right. Right now, we have a country branding issue. It is no positive to say that you are a brand from Malaysia in a global consumer's mind. And that's not surprising, because they haven't been exposed to a lot of Malaysian brands, right? So if they don't get exposed to it, how else are they going to form an opinion on what a Malaysian brand should be like in terms of quality or creativity? So I think that there's some country branding issues, and that will only change when we have a critical mass of Malaysian brands who are out there building a bit more of a name for Malaysia out there. So at the moment, if there's no positive, it's not something that that we use in a big way. But in our case, because there's a heritage story and we have to tell the heritage story, it's quite evident as soon as a person wants to know a bit more about the history of Royal Selangor that it is a Malaysian brand. So I think we do not hide it, but it would be much better if the country branding was something that supported the whole story. In the case of Japan or Germany or Switzerland, I think these are big positives of the brands coming up.
What about the role of embassies? When you go abroad, is that your first port of call? You actually visit the Malaysian embassy and try to see how they can help you, give you some lever, at least in negotiating space for property?
I'm not sure how good the relationships are between the embassies
So
and the landlords.
you do not go to the embassies as your point of contact?
I think we are happy to fly the Malaysian flag. When we do an event with the media or with our VIP customers in another country, we will certainly invite the ambassador. I think we're very happy to have them as a part of that process. And there will be opportunities to work with them and other Malaysian companies in that country. But really to get access to the right malls and all that, it's tough. I don't think anything set up within the Malaysian government structure right now gives you that sort of access to.
Do you think that should be the case? Should there be a government structure?
I think there is an opportunity. And in some countries, there's a de facto alternative. CapitaLand for Singapore is almost your access to retail space in China, because they are just building mall after mall in every city. So if you're a Singaporean brand, you're getting pretty good locations in a CapitaLand mall in China. So they have that avenue. In the Malaysian case, I don't know. I think we would have to develop some expertise in whether it's in MITI or on the trade councils within the embassies, to be able to understand what is retailing about, what is brand building about, and to then add value to the process. I think that's a long journey, but that would definitely be a very useful first port of call if you're thinking about a new market.
In the case of British India, what gives you the lever when you go abroad? If it's not the embassy, then what it is?
Essentially, most of the time when we go abroad, they have already heard of the brand, they have seen the brand, very likely to be in one of our fine malls in Kuala Lumpur. So that is their first association. So we don't really have to knock on doors very hard. We just say, we're from British India, would you like to meet up? That, taking it back, so that's why I'm always about quick wins and do what we can do, as opposed to thinking about things about reaching out through embassies. I feel that the networks are so tight within the retail industry. It's maybe a little bit of a stretch to ask ambassadors to add on to their existing workload. So back to what can we do right now is the way that capital malls would kind of give a priority space to Singaporean brands. I think if we're not asking for hands-outs, we're just thinking to be treated on a level playing ground with international brands, at least on home ground basis, right? So those are wins that may not be as immediately tangible, but definitely will have really big impact in the long run.
Suppose your contacts with the McKinsey alumni, that helps in some way, or you have not used it at all?
I have used some of it, but at the end of the day, this is what I've been trying to kind of move away from since that I've been back. Is at McKinsey we were like thinkers. Now you have to be more of a doer to kind of just get things done. I'm not saying that it's
that you don't do anything. Do anything?
No, it's the focus of time, because in reality, retail is a really kind of boots on the ground, hands-on work. You probably spend 10% of the time thinking of the solution, 90% of the time making sure that what you thought of is actually implemented and it's working. You flip it as a consultant of any sort, you will spend more time thinking of the solution. So that's just in terms of a roles change.
one of the strategies that Malaysian retailers are now doing, Borneo, for example, they are going abroad and they're setting up a studio in Europe, I suppose, to to harness designs and to sort of establish some sort of credibility. And even I think the NASA Group family, I think they also have a fashion label abroad. It's not here in Malaysia, it's abroad. And so is that a strategy you see could be something you employ, like having a studio abroad just to give yourself some cachet?
In our case, I think the opportunity is here in Asia. I don't think we're trying to position ourselves as European designs. I think there's a lot of design inspiration in Asian culture. A lot of our collections tell a story, and I think Asia is very rich in design inspiration. So we see the future of design coming from this part of the world. And I think there's a hunger for it. In the past, and maybe to some extent now in some populations, there is this sort of, oh, if it's a brand from Europe or from the US, it must be better because, Asian brands, what have they done? So I think that stigma is disappearing because there's now a hunger for saying, what can Asia offer from a creative point of view? Recently, we worked with a Chinese designer in Shanghai. His name is Jamie Yang. We just launched it a couple of weeks ago. He has won numerous international design awards. And there's so much interest in him by the Chinese media because he is one of very few Chinese designers who have been able to have credibility on an international stage. So I think that interest from the media really shows that hunger, that interest in saying, what can Asia offer? China should not be only the factory for the world, but a source of creative output. And as that continues and people appreciate that Asian design and Asian brands are something to be proud of, I think that would start flipping, that the design centers will be hopefully in Kuala Lumpur, but perhaps sooner in Singapore or Shanghai. And I think this part of the world will then be able to tap the talent pool that right now doesn't have an opportunity.
What do you mean by a design center sooner in Singapore than KL? KL has also a number of creative schools.
I think from a product design point of view, we're really, first steps. There's very little product design that happens right now. And so if you want to start getting that critical mass going, you've got to start doing, I think, what Singapore started a couple of years ago, which is to say we need to be a creative hub, right, and to manufacture that out from scratch. And to be able to say designers from the region, if you are a talented Thai designer or a Filipino designer and you're looking for a place to open a studio and to make this your base, come to Singapore. And I think that starts pulling talent into the city, which Singapore doesn't naturally have necessarily. So KL hasn't started that process, but eventually if we go down that road, I think then we will start building up that talent pool.
And one of the things about expanding abroad, it's very expensive to do retail, obviously, but the B2B business, I think Royal Selangor is quite big on the B2B, like you've done work for LVMH, Dom Perignon, even Manchester United, or the label pins, yeah. So is that one way to buffer your growth there?
No, there's no way you can build a B2B business if you don't have retail presence. It doesn't work. If you want to build a brand, you're not a credible brand if you don't have a retail shop, or if you have another form of distribution like department store concessions, that's fine. But you need to have retail presence. No, consumers need to see your brand. Otherwise, there's no reason for companies to buy your product. So the way for us to get into a market is we must have retail presence, and then we can then get better growth supported by corporate sales, B2B.
I think the retail presence is crucial, simply because you need to be close to the customers. Once you have a buffer in between, you lose that direct channel with the customers. Whatever we design, we want to see it work. So we actually would go down to the floor to observe, do the things fit, how do customers take to it, do they look good in it?
And well, let's talk about growth strategies, how you might grow overseas or even locally. Would acquisitions or even selling a stake to a private equity fund, would that make sense, say, for BritishIndia? Because like in the case of Charles and Keith, I think that's worked quite well for them.
So we have been pursued, and it is pretty flattering. And I don't think that we're the only ones who are being pursued. But I think ultimately it's a balance of finding the right partner to work with, plus while still retaining your creative freedom, right? So can I just leave it at that?
Okay. When you say creative freedom, because private equity funds may have very short-term thinking, and therefore you're afraid that it's all about dollars and cents, and
It's all
as a
about
result,
EBITDA.
then okay. Or maybe you want to bring it up to a certain valuation, then you think it's worth selling a stake to them.
Just say yes, Rhoda.
He answered. I'll take his answer.
Well.